poet can be traced through biographical transitions. It took off 10 years ago in Germany. Early in life, I chose contemporary dance, that is to say, prioritized the speechless form of expression, a belief in a different communication system, an ongoing attempt to marry a state, a concept, and a name. After long immersion in the life of immigration, my Russian began to shift verbally, German, mündlich, literally in my mouth, Mund. To write was to note this process down. Gradually, I shifted from the arts into poetry, not fully holding my first language anymore, carrying it temporarily within my own linguistic system and situation. 2 years after that, my practice in English followed. A language you develop as a foreigner on your own terms, a container holding a conversation, a longing for how to speak without that much strive for belonging. Looping around intricacies of word order. I'd say the materiality of my Russophone poems is denser, more object-like. Morphological possibilities blend with physical recollections. The practice relies on embodying the language in you. English and German remain in negative space when they are not present in the flesh. My English poems look for in-between space. They try to address, build a sentence, take things literally, shake hands, reach out. Sometimes I try to morph English. Oftentimes, both practices are at hand, and then my hands are full. Staying in one room long enough, I'm drawn to the other, or explore the corridors and intersections. There is a huge transfer, for instance, foreign I and use, ich und du, allowed me to take them up more freely in Russian. I'll come back to that, and now an I that we share. How long is the letter I? How lonely is the letter I? How long is the sound Q? How deep is the sound? How deep is the C? Have you seen the letter I? Did it show up? Did it show down? How long is the down time of a downing letter I? Of a drowning letter, of a drawn letter, of a gesture of letter to the left, of a left letter to stay unattended, unended, in a long-sounding, ungestured letter, in a let be letter, in a let it liter, in a letter trying to tail, lettre in pursuing, the latter in catching, the letter at its end. Having consulted with a tailor, if blue is nowhere, out of where comes the red? If it comes, will it go? If it went, what did it underwent? If nowhere is wet, where does it rain? Here is the Rhine. Will you rhyme? Played out, what do they lay? If these are eggs, where is the hen? If hence is to have a consequence, who is going to have hints? If it hinges on the brink, here is some ink. If the ink is red, we pick up where we left off. If off script is after kasha, will it cash off? If kasha is the mishung, is the dog's name Misha? If Misha is the uncle, who is the sun? If the sun is out, where did the moon go? If the ants are orbiting the ring, is it spring? If it sprung a rainbow and a roundabout and the Regenbogen, не бойся. Im, voraus, impact, implication. I am implied in this implication, in this намерение на мера пресечения, сечь, приближение, прибавление, to come, to come in, to welcoming, too much of a well. One can hear in a well, its borders are well. Come in the sound. Sound bounces back, backlash, backstage, backstagnierend, to stash in a stock, squish oneself in a stock, stack onto, accumulate, акупунктур, аккумулятор, зарядка, за, рядом, за, Helans. Do you give more time to a reader who reads herself in translation? She and her stunt double, do you see double? Is translation a stunt? Is it lying auf einer besetzbaren Matratze? Is it a double bed? Is it a bed double or nothing? Did you set a privacy wall? Is there a template? Is there another to follow? Are you late for the next reader? Does the space support the separation? Are we attached to a two-sided port? Do you depart from a point of origin? Do you trace yourself from your point of arrival? Is another language a rival? Do you race for both? Pretext, предтеча, preposition, excuse. I suggest you read half as much, twice. I suggest you take twice as much time. I suggest you stay in the middle and mind the audience. We might have tons of suggestions. Adjusting to tongues. Mute, mutilation, grain, gain, against the grain. It's not so much the time that I'm short of, but the breath. Depending on the rhythm and my capability to recite, alternating between languages with longer units may give you a break, but fragments in proximity demand phonic precision. Following the sound, most of my books are also on SoundCloud. Hi. I'm your reader. I'm in reading your work. I stay on my side of the lane. I outline what is here on the line, in the landscape of your text, in the scope of vermeiden. Vermissen, misreading, mistreating, misreacting, vermischen. I get mixed up. Я теряюсь в твоем тексте. Poetics или поэтика. Поэтики множественного или единственного. Fourth person, singular, fourth person. They. Versehen. Aus Versehen habe ich hier was anderes gesehen. Gerät, geredet, gerät, vehicle. Art as vehicle. Vehicular language as opposed to язык перемещения, язык колесо, языку звук. Свыкнуться тут, sich gewöhnen. Останусь здесь. Взвесь, взболтать, постировать, взболтнуть, вывалить. Шлепая, тащись на шлептау. За птичкой. Tell me why. Tell me X, tell me Z, tell me здесь. Tell X from Y, tell me from your heart. Tell it to my, oh my. Tell my sister word for word. Tell me squat, nada, nada, yellow. Your bedtime starts soon. Tell me about a bed. Обедать. Tell my dad. Dad. 30 лет плюс подросточный воз. Rust. Tell me about growth. Tell an oath. Tell me oatmeal. Did you out-oat me? Tell me. Mia. Me. Mia. Mia. Mir. Mourir. Say to stop. Say to go. Gold me. Say to turn gray. Today. To tell my grayish, hairish, mish. Tell me. Mich. Tell me to use три буквы. Tell me to unuse words. Tell world from word. Reward me with some telling. Retell up to a well-in. Tell me repercussion. Cushion. The lie. The next one is in memory of Alexei Navalny. It is the end of the day what matters at the end of the day. Time is not there for us. It is not there for them. Time belongs to a body of work to be dealt with by dawn. The business is sketchy. It's a draft. Skipping a couple of days, time is of the essence, but it runs off course, has rolled. But that course taucht ein in die Enttäuschung, in the name and mire of hope. Do you wear your tampon? Do you wear yourself out? Do you wear your tampon out? Are you wary of your sentence? Do you wear your body? How long will it serve your tampon? How long will you face those who are wary of who you are? Are you listening to your tampon? Is it there to communicate? What about community? Is it a collection of mutinies and mutenesses? What do they have to say? Should you avoid speaking in tampon or avoid your tongue? I'm here to wipe your nyuni, your nanny English. To bish gibberish. It's about how you use your sentence. It's about sentencing yourself to power of expression. It's about pressing on your tempo, not pressing on the issue. It's about issuing your book in isolation. It's about power. Power is there to speak for you or to stiffen with inconvenience. A tampon is there to support your space. Spotelic is that you abort to where you came from. Keep the elephant out of it, not enough room. Expelling. Normalerweise muss man нормальные слова usage. Usually I should have a clue what words to use. They are cueing us to be klug. Встают в круг. Auf eine Wiese wissend. Someone is at ease with words when they release them orderly. Orderly. Лишка eng. Unleash. Маленько. Usually words come in clusters. They are sculpted into a snowman who is also a no-man. Sophia says she's fond of anomalies. A form of a norm is enormous, then a mouse runs by. Usually I get lemons, or the limits of words prone to imitation. Normally, I have to correct. Usually I need to come up with more ordinary speech. Speech in Russian is almost bitter, without go. It leaks out unbidden until someone puts up a wall. Someone. Bitter. Vladimir Feshchenko, the author of Russian and American Poetry of Experiment, asked me 5 years ago to gather a selection of mixed poems, as he couldn't find many in my first collection. With time, I allowed more mixing. What is said is attached to the language it uses. Sound and sense across languages often cross your mind simultaneously. A translational gesture may be involved. These poems are more concise. Changes occur as microshifts, interlingual paronymy, or as phraseological correlations. Multilingual poetry, not just mine, creates this sonic space. I could name it soundful versus speechless, mentioned in relation to dance practice. This space actualizes communication in real time. You stay alert, navigating between proximate meaning, approximating in case of vague understanding or several meanings clashing, and distant but present sound. That isn't to say that these poems shouldn't be published. Just like hearing and unhearing, we are both on the same page with the author and beyond it, out of focus. Some body of work is out of reach. 2 years ago, here in PA, I published my first chapbook with Eulalia Books, titled Oversight. The series is called Translation Poetics. Oversight gathers the most mixed English-based poems I had and 2 Russophone poems co-translated with Eugene. It includes images of hand-drafted color poems. Physical copies aren't available anymore. There's an e-book and a copy in your library being processed. I made a decision to place fragmented translations on the right margin of each page. I like how they create tension and a landscape, also how Russian and German are put into relation through the lens of English. Sometimes I treat this fragment more freely and let it take a little sidetrack. The same decision transitioned to my full-length collection, Distance. I've had great experiences on my tour in the US. Nowhere else had I such a responsive and present listener. While struggling to find a publisher for my second Russophone collection, I drafted a project for a German publisher. It gathers Russian, English, and German-based poems. Working title, Umzug из языка. Moving out of a language. Umzug, umziehen. And ziehen is to drag. Sometimes I feel as if I'm pulling myself out of the mire by my own hair. I'll proceed with a couple of poems to end, just one without translation, sorry. Я ненавижу слово «нация». Нормально отношусь к nation. Я не нагляжусь на себя и не избегаю I. Я избегалась, но не устала. Я müde, иногда ermüdet. Я tired иногда. Tired again. Я не вышла из строя и не устала. Я машина, иногда механизм. Я в меху. Иногда механизирована. Я навижу, иногда завидую. Завидую за видом, захожу за ходом. I'm walking towards the future, but don't see any будущее. I don't give a fuck how you identify me, but I know exactly how you would. I'm surprised when being liked. I'm dejected when being ejected. I have a meeting today at 12:45. This means I'll finish my kasha soon and walk toward. I want to pass by безумный обед. Thanks for invite. Dear цапля. Invite, просто ничего не добавляй. Uninvite, ununiversalize, unreply, unrepeat, unrestore. Repose, suppose, oppose, oppress, оправду. А вы, мы, сел. Оса уселась на забор и стала выть поверх двора. Двура, дважды раз, распоротый пароль. I'll skip one. Or should I finish soon? The next one is translated by me and Elena Alter. Yesterday was sunshine. Sunshine were bright, the day was cold, the village was distant. The court held cats, we walked together, no word said about salt. Set out downstairs, downed water skins, sport. From glass to glass, space passing, hand to hand, walls solidly collapsing, prejudice stand. For Transmission ran end first, turned standing across. First attempt effective, second attempt effective, third attempt in affect, fourth attendance all full, fifth andante flatwise, seventh tilt toward onsettled settlement. Вчера было солнце, солнце было светлым, день был холодным. Деревня была далекой, койка была с котиками. Просыпались вместе, про соль речь не шла. Шлепали по ступеням, пили водицы бутылок. Переливали из стакана в стакан. С руки на руку переводилось с места. Стенки прочно проваливались. Prejudice представала перед. Передача шла концом. Поворачивались напротив. Первый раз удался. Второй раз удавался. Третий раз удовольствие. Четвертый раз вдоволь. Пятый раз вдоль. На седьмой раз доводился на сест на селения. The next and last one is translated by me and Zhenya. He died a natural death. She died a natural death. We died naturally. Naturally, they died. They were chosen by our standard, made to stand to our understanding. That should be enough. They charted to under a part, standing. He died a natural death. They is not dead yet, not dead by half, over and under. Down glows the candle, after its own nature, at an angle not its own. Do not grab below the link. A cast of natural, unnatural, not naturalized in haste, not on foot, unwilling, doesn't gobble down after grabbing, grasping under the arms, leading by ways, lost track of on the neck, climbs down, mumbling, your own has no name. Not your own has no gouge. Those on tour still retain their call. All over the detour. Он умер своей смертью, она умерла своей смертью, мы умерли нашей смертью, они умерли. Их выбирали под свой размер. Они вставали под подстоянием, пожалуй, достаточно. Подрастали под расстояние. Он умер своей смертью, они не умер еще, не под, умер над под. Полого горит свеча, наподобие своего, под углом не своей. Не хватать под связью, слепок своей, не своей, не освоенный наспех, не пешим, нехотя ходом, не хавает, похватав. Подхватив под локти, подведя запасы, запропастившись шеи, слазит, шевеля губой. У своей нет имени, у не своей нет выемки, у шествующего остается покрик, покрывая весь крюк. Thank you.
Okay. So a few months ago, I edited and published this book. It came out in Helsinki, and it's the first volume of a translingual literature series that I'm editing. Hopefully, there'll be a second and a third volume, but you never know. And it's by a poet who came to Berlin in 2014 from Russia, I guess as a political. And in 22, as the result of Russia's invasion, the full-scale invasion, began to write in her native language, in Tatar. Although she already had a reputation poet. Her Tatar was a language that she was never schooled in. It was a family language. Her parents at that point were dead. Her grandparents were dead. So it's a language that she did not really use in everyday life, and that kind of shriveled. But her project to write in it was really interesting for me because it wasn't about I'm going to learn this language and make and write in a literary version of this language, but I'm going to use the words that I know and that I think I know to build poetry out of them. And she called this project Lost Lingual. Okay, so I guess the first difficulty with translingual poetry is who the hell is going to publish it, okay? Because the audience for it is not obvious, right? You can't just go and drop in on a ready-made audience in a language. And so the person who asked me to do it is himself kind of a very post-national, transnational, whatever word you want to use, somebody who is from Kosovo but went to school in Helsinki, lives in Helsinki, is really interested in the most radical forms of Russian avant-garde of the beginning of the 20th century, which is how I know him, and publishes the stuff in English. So somebody who regularly lives in many, many languages, including Turkish. His name is Sezgin Boynek. And we decided that the series would be called Zdvik, which is, it's a Russian word. It's a word that came out of the Russian avant-garde. It's a noun from the word zdvinut, to move something from place to place, to set something in motion. But it's a word that first appeared in kind of theory of Cubism, when Cubism was coming to the Russian Empire. As, you know, in Cubism, you put the nose on the cheek, that's a zdvik, right? So it's a violation, it's literally, you know, you move things around. And then in 1913, it enters the kind of the discourse of poetry, or discourse about poetry. And it starts meaning all sorts of things: dislocation, displacement, and especially in futurist poetry, it's a move that causes a double take in the reader, okay? So the reader reads something one way, but then you put something into the text that the reader realizes that it really should be read another way. So basically, it's a pun, okay? It's a kind of very complicated, curious way of thinking about puns, okay? So this is the name of the series, and there were lots and lots of challenges apart from, who's going to be the audience for this. We were even thinking that it's cool to do this in Finland because Finland actually has a sizable Tatar diaspora who fled to Finland around the year 1917 and who have been living in Finland but are kind of hanging on to their language, although the language has changed. It's not quite the same language, and we're still trying to figure out ways of appealing to them. I don't know, through community centers. The question is how to sell this book or how to make people read it. Okay, so yes, yeah, there's some copies of the book in the back. Okay, so for me, what was especially interesting in the way that Dinara works, Dinara Suleva is the name of the author, is just the incredible level of punning. You probably don't know Tatar, I don't, but you can see that these are all words that look roughly the same, but they're actually all different words in different parts of speech. Okay? There's a kind of an English language gloss rather than a translation. And then another thing that she does that I thought was really cool, but also fitted in with my ideas about how people working between multiple languages work, is when she jumps between languages. So here she's jumping from Tatar to Russian. The Tatar is kapkara, which is really black, super black, deep black, to the Russian kap, which is the sound of dripping. Okay. The connections with German here between German and Tatar are also made by sound. Okay, and in fact, I don't know, one of the nerdy things that I occasionally do, I very rarely do nerdy things, but is I've read a few Cogsci books on bilingualism, and in fact, it seems to be that in people who are multilingual and keep their languages relatively active, that they're much more prone to make associations by sound than semantic associations, which are more common among monolinguals. It's not like an absolute difference, but it's statistically noticeable. Okay, so when you're formatting this text, when you're publishing this text, the first question is, well, should this text be translated? Because if the most salient aspect of this text is that the way that it combines languages, you translate it, the most important thing is gone. So Dinara started to build a system which is not quite translations, but a way of, I don't know, cribbing, glossing, but in such a way that the reader has to look at the original. Okay? That the reader is always reading, is always going between the English, because the English is not sufficient, and less prominent. We did kind of glosses and commentary in gray, right? That the original is in black, and that the reader has to deal with Tatar, right? sometimes has to deal with Russian. Sometimes has to deal with German. And what that means is if you think of translingual poetry as a kind of poetry that goes between languages, absolutely the first thing that it needs to deal with is linguistic difference, okay? Untranslatability. Because if languages are perfectly translatable, you don't need to have multilingualism. Okay, so kind of the ground of justification, if you want, is some kind of version of Sapir-Whorf, right? Some kind of linguistic relativity. Yeah, does that make sense? Otherwise the poetry is just showing off. Yeah. Okay, so here I just did like a screenshot of an edit when we're working on her text. This is a fairly late phase. Again, you can see very heavy punning. The word tell in Tatar is language. She adds an L to it so that, you know, it's playing with the English tell. Okay, and the question here for me as an editor is how heavily do I edit this text? I'll give you an example. Okay, so first we have to decide what script to use for Tatar. Because kind of Tatar activists, when they're given the chance, they use Latin letters. This is how it was in the 20s, and then kind of increased Stalinism forced them to change into Cyrillic. The same, it's not just Tatar, it's lots of people in lots of different peoples in the, I was going to say in the Russian Empire, in the Soviet Empire. The same thing happened in the 90s. There was a kind of movement towards Latin letters, and by some law in 2002, it was brought back to Cyrillic. Okay, so the first, you know, when we were discussing how to print it, you know, our first question was, well, what script do we use? And the fact that she uses a Latin script is already kind of a political statement. Then her Russian, there were no grammar issues at all. My grammar is definitely worse. But there was a whole question about standardization of English. So she wrote a huge amount of stuff in English. She wrote commentary to her poems in English. And in a book so concerned with linguistic colonialism, right, and in fact, Russian linguistic colonialism, I felt kind of weird imposing English language standards. And I hemmed and hawed for quite a long time. And we did a whole bunch of Zooms until more or less I kind of edited it in a more or less, at least consistent manner, because there was a lot of inconsistency. Poems written from, you know, I don't know, different months, right? You're not going to be super consistent. And so yeah, so that's the colonial issues were very big here, right? And in the end, we decided that if we leave the text inconsistent, highly inconsistent in English, it's really going to interfere with the way that people read it. So because we wanted people to read it, I had to roll up my sleeves and do a bit of editing. But again, this was a collective decision, which I think is pretty important here. Okay, so now I'm going to talk about, you know, my stuff, how I understand this. So yeah, so there's the whole joke with language, but the unequal sign, right, which is about untranslatability. The basic issue here is that languages are not interchangeable. Language choice is a significant factor in meaning. And they're also not transparent. And I'm a translator. I translate a lot, and I have a lot of experience in translating poetry in particular. And that experience is always, you start with one thing and you end up with another, right? So the way that people kind of normally think of translation as giving you a kind of a substitute, at least in the type of material that I work with, which is poetry and often kind of poetry that plays with language, for me, translation is a metamorphosis. So when I talk in poems, directly or usually obliquely, of going from one language to another language, there's always a gap. Okay? There's always a gap and there's always a transformation. Remember Bottom Thou translated from Midsummer Nights, when one of the rude mechanicals gets the head of an ass, right? He has 2 ears. The second thing that's important for me in my poetics is what you already saw in Donata and what you heard in Ina's work. It's the emphasis on linguistic materiality, right? It's a word is an object at least as much as it is a sign. And what that means is that the text is heavily about punning, whether punning between languages or punning inside a language. One, just because, I don't know, for me poetry is multiplication of meanings. And if I can multiply meanings by using one word, I would rather do that than just use a lot of words, because I'm lazy. But the other thing is that punning is what makes words opaque, what makes them into things, what calls attention to the words, as objects. And finally, I think you heard this a lot in Ina's work. It's constant emphasis on metalinguistic issues, right? There's no immediate access to the world of objects, but what you focus on is the way that these objects are formatted by language. Does that make sense? And finally, and I'll read a few poems after this. You know, translingualism, at least by name, is about mixing languages, but there's no language independent of culture, whatever culture is, right? There's no such, stable thing as this culture or that culture. But there are associations between words. There are ways of saying things. There are things that one emphasizes and things that one says in one cultural context that one would not emphasize in another. So there's a kind of doubling, and this is another reason why I think punning is very important. Because you become, going from one culture to another culture, being translated from one culture to another culture, transformed, you develop a kind of double vision. And for me, there's a lot of, when people talk about multilingualism or translingualism, the metaphor of doubleness keeps coming up, like a double being, a double being, a double being. And for me, one of my favorite kind of instances of doubleness is in the Bacchae, Euripides, when Dionysus is addling the mind of Pentheus and gets him to put on women's clothes and to become a Maenad. At this point, Pentheus says that I see two suns and I see two Thebes. Okay, and then Racine picks this up. It's in Phèdre. The double sun thing is it has a long history, literary history afterwards. One of the most important texts on the theory of translation that gives us foreignizing and domesticating translation, Schleiermacher, also makes an argument. This is the Romantic period. It's one language, one person. You can't have two native languages. Having two native languages is unnatural. There's a political program to this. It's the rise of the nation state. Yeah. How do you know what nation state you belong to? Well, what your native language is, right? And if you have two, then, you're a ruthless cosmopolitan. Schleiermacher makes this whole argument that you cannot you cannot make original literary contributions in a language that is not your native language. And he calls people who pretend to be, writers in two languages, he says they walk around doppelgäng, yeah, like a ghost. And finally, if any of you have read Minai Mizumura's great The Fall of Language in the Age of English, which is an amazing book on the power asymmetry of English compared to other languages, institutional power asymmetry. She talks about non-English speakers or people outside, the mainstream global culture, sometimes it mixes, as having a double temporality. So you have to watch what the mainstream culture does, but you also have like your own local thing, which the only way it can go from your location to another location is if it gets translated into the universal language, right? And she calls that double temporality. Okay, this is a lot of doubles. And I'm just going to read a few poems. Do I still have time? Yeah. I'm going to read a few poems as an example. So I don't know. My stuff is difficult, and I often read to people, who are not native English speakers. I'm not a native English speaker, so I like to show them what I do. Okay, so this is a poem which is based on translation. The translations generally get weirder and weirder as the poem goes on between English and German. And they get weirder and weirder because of pun. I think the main puns are in the red. You see. Okay, but it's from the Feeling Sonnets. It's number 14, and the idea for it is that Mandelstam, in a poem of his from 1934, has this weird line where he says, «Часто пишется казнь, читается правильно песень», which is often what's written is казнь is execution, but he uses it in a kind of very old Russian way where it means suffering or affliction, right? So often what is read is suffering, what is written is suffering, but what is read is песень or song. And I was looking at this and I was like, казнь and песень, they're kind of similar, right? Because the whole consonant vowel structure is similar. But probably Mandelstam was actually thinking in Russian, because he's probably thinking of das Leid, yeah, like suffering, whatever, and das Lied, which I misspelled here because, yeah, thanks. Okay. Das Lied hat gelogen. The song lied. Sorrow was the issue. Der Ausgang war Leid. Was it the sorrow of love? War es das Leid der Liebe? The sorrow of love burdens not only the soul, but also the body. Das Leid der Liebe belastet nicht nur die Seele, sondern auch den Leib. You can imagine this poem like, I don't think these books exist anymore, but like разговорники, like when you would go to a country and you'd like, yeah, like conversation, like, yeah, like where you get, where is the nearest gas station? Like that kind of, yeah. The soul is silly. Die Seele ist dumm. It is silly because it does not know how to speak. Sie ist dumm, weil sie nicht sprechen kann. It is language that says things in its name. Es ist die Sprache, die Sachen in ihrem Namen sagt. Actually, it says words, not things. Eigentlich sagt sie Wörter, nicht Sachen. Deutsch ist eine deutliche Sprache. The German language is limpid. Sie ist bedeutungsvoll. German is full of meaning. The meaning of German in English is closely related. Englisch heißt Englisch, weil es eng mit Deutsch verwandt ist. Eng is like narrowly related. Many words in German look like many other words in German. Viele Wörter auf Deutsch ähneln vielen anderen Wörtern auf Deutsch. This endows German with a light air of duplicity. Das verleiht dem Deutschen einen leichten Touch der Doppelzungigkeit, double-tonguedness. Often you write das Leid, but read das Lied. Feeling Sonnet 17, it basically has one word that compresses daughter, Tochter, tot, totter, and then there's also play with tot and tot, which in Russian is that other, and in German is dead. This is my totter. This is my other totter. They play address and redress. They are princesses. They wear prints. They wear prints out. Out of what? Out of line. Out to what? Out to tatters. They, hey, do they speak? They speak a speak. They speak a speak of minds and takes. They speak a speak of eeks and keeps. They speak a speak of rates and tears. They speak a speak I speak of not speaking. Hey, my totters totter across the room. My other totter totters across the room. My two totters totter across the room. They take a stance. They take a stance by happenstance. Totter, I'm taught to you, I'm that other. Totter, I'm taught to you, I'm that other. I'm that other to my totters. 35. Okay, very literal, very erudite Russian pun on between the word for stone and kamen, which is also Mandelstam's first book. And kamene are kamenai, so the muses. There were separate goddesses in early Rome, but Livius Andronicus, the translator of the Odyssey into Latin, just kind of adopted them as muses, and they became muses. Kamene. A swan engages in self-reflection. The gardens of Leto do not commemorate Niobe. Riven, the vernal ice drifts on the Never River. Ava, my daughter, has a fever. Her face looks thinner. She ate bread and butter, my daughter. She wants me to lie next to her so that she may grab onto the sides of my head and drift off to sleep. Fata, water. She wakes up, goes to pee-pee. I hold her over the bowl. I try to wrap her in a bathrobe. No, I'm schwitzing. I do not need it. I'm not cold. I'm wet. She sneezes, a popel hanging out of her nose. Der popel, but die Popel. Ich sah meine Popel, and so on. I saw my poplar at Salon. She reads Asterix and is delighted when I tell her that Ave is Ava spelled backwards. Papa, says Ava, holding a brownish apple. Schmeiß es weg. I schmeiß it weg. We live in Berlin. So this other translingual thing I do is now they're kind of older than that. But I used to write down what my daughters said, and actually the book is coming out in like a month or something. And they mix German and English in really, really super interesting ways. Kind of like I'm schwitzing, where the root of the verb would be German, but all the morphological stuff around it would be English. And I was thinking like they're four and they know the difference between the root, and they know what a verb is. And when I ask my freshmen what was the verb in this sentence, they just blank. But somehow intuitively, 4-year-olds know. Bizarre. This is a different cycle. Falling Sonnet 9. I sent my pen pal a palindrome. Lol. Pal, slap not on pal's lap. Free freedom. Is ill a palindrome if the typeface is sans serif? The dome in freedom stands for house. My pen pal and I sing, this land is your land, this land is my land. Pronouns can stand for just about anyone. You are my pal in drone. You go on and on without end. You lazy, yawning drone penned over to the executor pale. O executor is the pale that of settlement. More wordplay passed between us than between Dido and Dodo in anticipation of the Punic Wars. Our tears tasted of salt 1 and salt 2 till good Cato became our bouncer. We sang an air about ethical cleaning. Remember me, but forget my fate, which is Dido and Purcell. I have been attacked by my pen pal, and now I am attacking them back. I am attacking them with a full backery. All my rolls are on a roll. The pen pal is in the pen. What is the color of ink? It is an incorporated color. What can you write with it? Oh, pal, where is thy Paul? Writing is appalling. It converts pen pal to PayPal. It stains your palm. It is a date palm. There's time over it, pal. The pal is pooling on a loop in your lap, Mary Bones. 11. I think I have 2 more, something like that. The dead are carried away in tote bags. Because they got carried away, they're borne away. Only some of those borne away got carried away. Some of the others borne away were newly born or else had borne them. They got borne away from home, or was it to home? What is home? Is it where they still bear with you when you get carried away? Or is it where they still bear you around when you get carried away? What parts of speech become the dead in translation? Perhaps those about to be interred are interpreted. Alas, they're translated. They're not interpreted by the god of sleep. They are translated by the bare power of the thunderbolt. They are newly born. They are still born in tote bags. What parts of speech may make the born and the bearers bearable in tote bags? Such is our target language that nobody who became a target will ever return to being a source. Such are our tote bags that nobody may know the bearer from the born. And the last one, also from the Falling Sonnet Cycles. This army is humane, but those people are human. Human means made of humus. Humus is made by decomposition of plant and animal matter. These people have been inhumed, but those people have been exhumed. Such is our humor. We are a humored people. Today our humor is sanguine. We like having our funny bone tickled. The funny bone is called the humorous. We like having a home. Home means never having to say you're sorry. The adjective sorry seems to be, but is not a relative of the verb sorrow. Sorrow, sorrow, sorrow. Sorrow is for tomorrow. He found her by a fountain of water in the wilderness and said, Whence camest thou, and whither wilt thou go? And she said, I flee from the face of my mistress, sorrow. And he said to her, Return, for a borrowed sorrow shall return tomorrow. These people are infantile. That army is inhumane, but these people, they are soiled. How did they get that way? they have soiled themselves. They have inserted themselves in the soil. In sorrow shalt thou eat of the soil all the days of thy life. Thank you.
Don't want to keep us that long, and I also know that people have things to ask these poets. Yes? So I'm going to tell you what my questions would have been, and you can think about them, and you guys can think about them and ask and answer them if you want while you're answering the audience. But I don't think I want you to answer my questions, but their questions, because they've been so patient and wonderful to come out tonight. My questions were going to be, first of all, you spoke a little, Eugene, about the problem of publishing multilingual poetry, but I was interested in what the experience of writing multilingual poetry is, in that, you know, you're writing a poem, you know what you mean.
No, you don't.
Or you don't. But when you're writing a poem which is going to be read in multiple different ways by these multiple different members of the audience who have multiple different capacities in the multiple different languages you're using, how is it that you read back to yourself as you're writing the meaning of what you're doing? Or are you always thinking about an ideal reader who is in the same space as you? So I'm just interested in what the mechanics are of writing this way, and if you're like gaming out like a game of chess, the multiple different versions of the reading which is possible for the multiple different readers, or not. So that was one question.
But you don't want me to answer it.
No, you can answer. I don't want to like, keep the audience waiting for their questions, because I know what it's like to be in an audience and like, I have this burning question for all this interesting stuff. So you can answer it if you want.
I can answer it in 2 words.
Wait, let me. My other question was about humor, and I could go on at length about the humor, but I mean, there's the gap between coming up to a person who has perfect language, or is mixing language, to say you talk funny, which is a way of exerting a certain kind of a language hierarchy, putting them into a social space. And then there is your poetry, which is somehow taking funny talk and turning it into poetry, which is not, it's funny, but it's not you talk funny. It's poetry which becomes analytical in the ways that it is interrogating multilingual usage and interrogating non-standard speech. There's a kind of an interesting thing which is going on in your editing of the Rasuleva, and I'm interested there too. It's like you edited her notes to get standard English, but probably not the poetry or her glosses, right? So it's that gap there, right? That's like in the poetry, it's okay to be non-standard because it's doing something.
I can ask her if she wants to have it this way.
Yeah. But I'm interested actually in your discussion, in thinking about what is the trick which is going on, which allows this still funny, because it's so much based on puns and humor, this still funny speech to not be you talk funny, and to be doing something else, something which is actually taking the high ground in language. You're like making art, which is assuming a position of, in fact, elevation, stylistic elevation above the you talk. So anyway, was rolling around in my head. I'm sorry if the question is like poorly phrased.
It's very well phrased, but you don't want me to answer it.
No, I know that these people have other questions. You can get to my questions if you have time later, but I'm sure that there are questions that are more important from the audience. So I think we should turn to those. Is that okay? So Ron has a question.
I have about 40.
Wait, let's use.
We have a mic.
Let's use this mic.
Yeah. It's on. It's on.
Yeah.
But am I? There are assumptions underpinning everything you did tonight about English as some kind of perhaps imperial hegemony. But in fact, the version of English that I speak, being basically basically monolingual, although I learned to read German before I did English, is only the third most common version of English on this planet. More people speak what we sometimes call Spanglish than English. More people speak Chinglish than English. And yet it all gets characterized as, quote, English. And when I am calling some institution and getting, you know, a poor remote worker in the Philippines, you know, sometimes we manage to make a connection, and sometimes not in those terms. And it's interesting, sort of the assumptions one has to make to pursue this kind of doubling and tripling of language, because it presumes somewhere a stable language, and I don't think any language ever has been stable. There's if you look on Wikipedia, you know, they will tell you there's 7,100 languages, but only 45 are the official languages of different nations. And that means there are so many others, you know, that don't come around and exist. I point people to Buntling, which you can find copies of a doctoral dissertation on it, which was a language that was created in Northern California near Mendocino in the 19th century by teenagers who wanted to communicate obscene things without their parents knowing it. But the teenagers of the 1890s became the 40-year-olds of the 1920s, and they were still using the language. Mm-hmm. And when I was a kid, I could go to a folk festival, and they would have somebody from Anderson or Philo or Mendocino telling a story in Buntling. It would be a story everybody knew, like Peter and the Wolf. But it didn't, even though it used English words, none of them meant what we thought they meant, you know. And so I'm hearing what you're doing. I'm thinking of Kruchenik and his laughing poem as an historical basis for hearing what you're doing. That's probably what more people are going to be familiar with than some of the other stuff that I bring in. But you know, it's a really interesting, complex project, and the whole question, I mean, you know, how are you going to find readers is really an interesting one. I think the answer is you have to have totters.
Totters. You guys want to respond?
I mean, as far, so, you know, what you said about different varieties of English and different power differentials, good God, assorted asymmetries, is very valuable, but, you know, in a way with Donata's book, right? Donata's book is coming out in Europe, which in the EU, which has a very particular relationship to English right now, and the relationship for writers to English is also quite different. If you look at you know, all the international residencies, all the international prizes, almost always the other language, the language that people have in common, will be English. Yeah. And this is a very different power situation than that of somebody, you know, speaking Chinglish in the US, for example. And because of that very large power differential, there are lots and lots of people in Europe for whom English is not a native language by a long shot, who feel compelled to write in standard English, right? Without alienating it, without making it an issue, but purely because to bypass the translation problem, the finding of the translator, which is very, very difficult. Having the translator take care of you, which is very, very difficult. I mean, take care of you, meaning like, place your work. So there's definitely a power asymmetry there on that level, in the world of writing.
Yeah. So I mean, I'm a different case because I'm bilingual. So far, I tried to kind of separate it into different books. So you would have the book with English as a base language, or with Russian. And with English, for instance, I wouldn't go too far. I wouldn't include completely multilingual text in. I would feel shy, or I would include only those that I can gloss. And then when I gloss, I do it on the same page, so you can basically relate one to the other. And I also have a playlist. And I think really with multilingual work, it's really important to hear it and for it to be in the space. If I'm really going wild into 3 language book, for instance, then I would rather do it in Germany, where I would have the most audience, basically. At the same time, I wouldn't want to publish an English language collection in Europe, because I feel it's more alienating for me. Then I think we have more matching points here.
Are there questions?
Well, not exactly a question, more of a linguistic commentary. Mr. Ostashevsky, you mentioned that the choice of script for translating Tatar poetry was important to you, and I do believe that Tatar language activists prefer the Latin script these days, but actually the history of Tatar script is a little more complicated and layered. So before the revolution, Tatar was actually using Arabic-based script.
Right.
The same as Uzbek, and the same as the Ottoman Empire.
Right.
So my best guess would be, so actually the Tatarstan only switched to Latin script for like merely a decade. Yeah. So like from the late 20s to the late 30s. And my best guess would be just like, being inspired by Turkish nationalism. And Tatar is a Turkic language, to those who don't really know Tatar. You probably know much more about Tatar by now than I do. But I think it's certainly interesting that so many formerly Soviet cultural identities, they shifted from this, like choosing the Arabic script for your national language. If you don't have the alphabet, that is certainly signaling religious identity.
Yeah.
And when the national identity became more important than the religious identity, I'm sure no one seriously considers going back to Arabic script in Uzbekistan or Tatarstan these days, because it would be seen as like not only isolating yourself, it would probably be seen as a gesture of religious fundamentalism. But I just thought it's like an important factor that should be mentioned as well. Thank you so much.
Other questions? I think, in the interests of the reception, because there's all this food out there that should be eaten. And we'll just people will trickle away. And we can continue these conversations and hear what you guys have to say about my questions and other questions from other people in the audience over a nice glass of wine or some other drink, and also some of the nice food the Kelly Writers House has provided. So as a final round of applause, before saying that, I should say what I said at the very beginning, which is thank you to the Kelly Writers House, to Zach Carduner, and to Jessica Lowenthal, who supported and were here earlier. I think some of them might still be here. but to the whole Kelly Writers House staff as well. But then also to our guests, Ina Krasnoper and Eugene Ostashevsky. Thank you so much for this really great event.
Thanks.
Thank you.
And now, just back there, discoteca, exactly.